are rules, even for your dying wife.
I'm a sheriff's deputy. You're obstructing emergency services.
Move your car, now! I was screaming into the darkness, still in my uniform pants and undershirt, barefoot on cold asphalt. The ambulance sat 20 feet away, lights strobing red and white across the subdivision entrance, siren wailing. But Deirdre Castellanos stood beside her black Mercedes, arms crossed, blocking the only way in. "I need to see your guest parking permit first," she said, clipboard in hand like a weapon. "Rules are rules, even for emergencies. My wife is seizing on our kitchen floor. Move. Your car." She didn't even flinch. "Then you should have submitted the proper visitor notification form 72 hours in advance." That's when I stopped asking. I'm an off-duty sheriff's deputy, 18 years on the force, and I just watched this woman choose a parking violation over my wife's life. I physically shoved her Mercedes out of the way myself, my hands leaving prints on her polished hood. The paramedics finally got through, but Jennifer had been seizing for 9 minutes. If you've ever felt that surge of helpless rage when bureaucracy becomes a weapon, you'll understand, so hit the subscribe button now. The hospital lights were too bright at 2 a.m. I sat in the waiting room while doctors stabilized Jennifer, my hands still shaking. She has type 1 diabetes, severe, unpredictable. We'd installed that amber medical beacon above our garage 8 months ago, the one connected to her glucose monitor, the one that helps EMS find our house fast in these winding subdivision streets. The endocrinologist recommended it after her last near-fatal episode. The enforcer in crimson, that's what the neighbors called her, always in her power suits and heels, had just added 9 minutes to my wife's suffering. 9 minutes of her brain being starved of oxygen while she seized. 9 minutes because of a parking permit. "Mr. Reynolds?" The doctor appeared, exhausted. "Your wife's stable, but the prolonged seizure caused complications we'll need to monitor. Every minute matters with hypoglycemic emergencies. Every minute matters." I drove home at dawn to find certified mail wedged in my door. Inside, a $500 fine for my amber beacon, unapproved exterior lighting, plus $2,000 in accumulated daily violations I'd never been notified about. 10-day compliance notice, or they'd file a lien on my home. The letter was signed in Deirdre's sharp, precise handwriting. The clipboard queen wanted $2,500 for the medical equipment keeping my wife alive, and she'd physically blocked an ambulance to prove she could. I looked up at that amber light glowing in the morning sun. Jennifer was in a hospital bed because of 9 minutes. 9 minutes, that could have been seconds. I'm a deputy. I know how people hide their crimes. And I was about to find out what else Deirdre Castellanos was hiding. 3 days after Jennifer came home from the hospital, I walked into the HOA office with that certified letter in my hand. The space was sterile. Laminated rule posters covering every wall, filing cabinets locked tight, and an oversized mahogany desk that screamed control. The board chair sat behind it, power suit immaculate, not a hair out of place. She didn't look up when I entered. "I'm here about this fine," I said, keeping my voice level. "The amber light is medical equipment. My wife's glucose monitor connects to it. EMS uses it to identify our house during emergencies. Medical necessity isn't outlined in our bylaws, Mr. Reynolds." She slid a document across the desk without meeting my eyes. Section 4.7, no exterior lighting modifications without written approval. You never submitted the proper forms. Because it's life-saving equipment. She nearly died because you violated community standards. The tyrant in heels leaned back in her chair. "Property values are my responsibility. Your beacon creates visual pollution that affects the entire neighborhood." Visual pollution. My wife's lifeline was visual pollution. I stared at the document she'd pushed toward me. A lien notice. Pay $2,500 within 10 days, or the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings on my home. "There has to be some accommodation process," I said. "A medical exemption." "There isn't." She finally looked at me, her expression carved from ice. "And I suggest you review our parking enforcement policies as well. Your vehicle was improperly positioned during the recent incident." She was threatening to fine me for where I'd parked while my wife was dying. That's when I noticed the wall calendar behind her desk, large, detailed, with dates and addresses marked in red. My address had a red X through it. So did 6 others scattered throughout the subdivision. "What's that?" I pointed at the calendar. The enforcer in crimson stood abruptly, blocking my view. "This meeting is over, Deputy Reynolds. 10 days, cash or certified check. She emphasized my title like an insult, like being a law enforcement officer meant nothing here in her kingdom of bylaws and violations. I left that office with ice in my veins instead of rage, because in 18 years of police work, I'd learned to recognize patterns. Those red X marks weren't random. They were targets. Back home, I pulled up a subdivision map and marked the 6 addresses I'd glimpsed on her calendar. Then I started walking. If the clipboard queen was targeting homes, I needed to know why, and I needed to know who else was in her crosshairs. The first house belonged to an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen. Her handrail violation notice was taped to her door. Mrs. Chen answered on the 3rd knock, arthritis making her movements slow and painful. The handrail bolted to her front steps. The one helping her navigate her own home had a bright orange violation sticker plastered across it. "They're fining me $300, she whispered, fear in her eyes. Said it's not architecturally consistent with neighborhood aesthetics. I documented her address, took photos of the violation notice, then moved to the next red-marked home. The Patels had solar panels. $500 fine for unapproved roof modifications. Dale Morrison, a veteran in a wheelchair, faced $750 for his accessibility ramp. Every targeted home had one thing in common: vulnerable residents making medical or accessibility modifications. The tyrant in heels wasn't just enforcing rules, she was hunting the weak. The 6th address led me to a corner lot with immaculate rose gardens. Brian Osworth was outside, meticulously deadheading blooms with trembling hands. He was older, maybe late 60s, with the careful movements of someone carrying invisible weight. "Mr. Osworth?" I approached slowly. "I'm Marcus Reynolds. I live over on Pinecrest." He didn't look up from his roses. "I know who you are. I voted on your violation last Tuesday." "Then you know this is wrong. That beacon is medical equipment." "I know." His voice was barely audible. The shears shook in his grip. "I know a lot of things are wrong." He finally met my eyes, and I saw something there. Guilt, maybe, or exhaustion. He glanced toward his house, toward a window where I could see a desk covered in neat stacks of papers. "I'm on the compliance committee," he said carefully. "Board member for 5 years. I keep very detailed meeting minutes. Every meeting." He emphasized those last 2 words, pruning another rose with unnecessary precision. 5 years worth. The air between us shifted. "Why are you telling me this?" His hand stopped shaking for just a moment. "Because I've watched her target people like Mrs. Chen, like the Patels, like you and your wife." He looked back at his roses. "My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer. We had medical oxygen deliveries 3 times a week. The clipboard queen tried to fine us for commercial vehicle violations." He set down his shears, his jaw tight. "I started documenting everything after that. Dates, discussions, votes, everything she said in those meetings when she thought nobody was paying attention." He finally looked at me directly. "I keep those minutes in my office, all of them, and I haven't missed a single meeting in 5 years." Brian Osworth was giving me a roadmap. He just couldn't hand me the destination. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded once, returning to his roses, but his message was clear. The evidence existed. I just had to figure out how to use it. I refused to remove the amber beacon. That decision cost me $100 per day in additional fines. Deirdre's personal escalation strategy. But the financial attack was just the beginning. Day 3, I got called into my shift commander's office. Latine Sarah Chen closed the door behind me, her expression tight. "Marcus, I need you to see something." She slid a formal complaint across her desk. "This came through official channels this morning." The complaint accused me of operating a commercial security business from a residential property and impersonating emergency personnel. It was filed by Deirdre Castellanos, complete with photos of my amber beacon and a detailed timeline of my suspicious activities, filed with my own sheriff's department. "She's trying to get me investigated by my own colleagues," I said, the words tasting like ash. "It's already been dismissed as frivolous," Sarah assured me. "But Marcus, this is on your record now. She's playing a different game than HOA violations." That evening, I opened my email to find a neighborhood-wide blast from the board chair. The subject line, "Community Violator Alert." My home address, my photo, and a paragraph about my refusal to respect community standards had been sent to all 127 homeowners in Whispering Pines. Jennifer read it over my shoulder, her hands shaking. "They're turning everyone against us." She wasn't wrong. The next morning, our neighbors crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Someone left a printout of the bylaws on our windshield. The isolation was surgical, deliberate. But the enforcer in crimson wasn't finished. I got a call from Danny Martinez, a paramedic I'd worked with on multi-agency responses. His voice was uncomfortable, apologetic. "Marcus, I need to give you a heads up. Someone from your HOA contacted county EMS last week, filed multiple complaints about false alarms from your address." He paused. "They're lobbying to move Whispering Pines to secondary response priority." My blood went cold. Secondary priority? That adds minutes to response times. "I know. The complaints claim your subdivision has chronic false alarm issues and that emergency resources are being wasted. Your address was specifically mentioned." Danny's frustration bled through the phone. I pushed back hard, but the request is under review. The clipboard queen wasn't just fining me. She was actively working to ensure that the next time Jennifer collapsed, the ambulance would arrive slower. She was weaponizing emergency services against my wife. I hung up and stared at that amber light through the window. Every flash was a reminder. Deirdre Castellanos had crossed a line that went beyond HOA violations. She'd interfered with public safety systems, and that meant she'd just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy her. I picked up the phone and called Sarah Chen back. "I need to talk to you, off the record, about emergency services interference." Sarah met me at an all-night diner 40 minutes outside our jurisdiction. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her coffee cup as I laid out everything: the blocked ambulance, the medical equipment violations, and the bomb Danny had dropped about EMS complaints. "She contacted county emergency services directly?" Sarah set down her cup, her command voice cutting through the late-night quiet. "To lobby for deprioritization of an entire subdivision. Specifically mentioned my address, said we're creating false alarm issues." Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd been in law enforcement for 25 years, and I watched her mentally shift from friend to tactical advisor. "Marcus, this isn't HOA overreach anymore. If she's interfering with emergency response protocols, she's crossed into public safety territory. County Emergency Services Authority doesn't mess around with this." "What do you mean?" "ESA has jurisdiction over anything affecting response times, emergency access, or resource allocation. They're the ones who investigate when gated communities create barriers to emergency vehicles." She leaned forward. 2 years ago, they sued a subdivision similar to yours, found the gate system and entrance design violated emergency access codes. The HOA had to pay for complete reconstruction. Something clicked in my mind. Our entrance, those decorative pillars Deirdre commissioned 3 years ago. How wide is the clearance? Narrow. I've seen fire trucks slow to a crawl getting through. I pulled up photos on my phone, the ornate brick pillars flanking our gate, barely 12 feet apart. And the gate system itself takes 30 seconds to open, even with the emergency override code. Sarah studied the photos. That's not compliant. Fire apparatus needs minimum 14-foot clearance, and gates need instant override capability. She looked up. "You know Tom Hendricks over at County Fire Marshal's office?" "From the academy. We worked a warehouse fire together 5 years back. Tom would jump at the chance to inspect a subdivision with potential access violations, especially if there's documentation of emergency response delays." Sarah's expression sharpened. "This is how you fight her, Marcus. Not in HOA meetings or with lawyers. You bring in the authorities that have actual power over emergency access. File a formal complaint with ESA about her interference. More than that, request a full emergency access compliance inspection through the fire marshal. If your subdivision has code violations, and from these photos, I'd bet money it does, the county can mandate corrections with daily fines until they comply." She smiled grimly. "And those fines? They make HOA violation fees look like pocket change. We're talking thousands per day." The tyrant in heels had been using bureaucracy as a weapon. It was time to show her what real authority looked like. I left that diner with a plan forming, but plans take time. Time I didn't have. At 2:30 a.m. on a Thursday, Jennifer's glucose monitor shrieked its alarm. I bolted from sleep to find her unresponsive. Her blood sugar crashed to dangerous levels. My hands were already dialing 911 before my brain fully caught up. "Stay with me, Jen. Stay with me." I pressed glucagon into her thigh, then ran outside to manually activate the amber beacon, making sure it was visible, undeniable. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes, faster than I'd expected. But as the paramedics loaded Jennifer onto the gurney, the lead medic, a woman named Torres, caught my eye. "We came from the east route," she said quietly. "Avoided your main entrance." "Why?" She hesitated, then pulled out her tablet, showing me 3 incident reports. "We filed complaints about Whispering Pines' gate system. Too narrow, too slow. It's a hazard. Dispatch has been routing us around it when possible. My subdivision's emergency access was so bad that EMS was actively avoiding the front entrance. At the hospital, while Jennifer stabilized under fluorescent lights that made her look ghostly, I sat in that familiar waiting room chair and made a decision. The clipboard queen had targeted vulnerable homeowners, blocked ambulances, and interfered with emergency services. She'd built a system where people like my wife could die because of decorative pillars and bylaws. I wasn't just fighting for my fine anymore. This was bigger. I pulled out my phone and called Tom Hendricks, fire marshal for the county. It was 5 a.m., but Tom was already awake. He ran a farm before his shift. "Marcus Reynolds, it's been a while." "Tom, I need to request a formal emergency access inspection of my subdivision, Whispering Pines Estates." I watched Jennifer through the window, her chest rising and falling steadily now. "And I need to file a complaint with County Emergency Services Authority about interference with emergency response protocols." "That's serious, Marcus. What am I looking at?" "Gate system with inadequate override, entrance pillars below code clearance, and an HOA president who's been lobbying EMS to deprioritize our area." I pulled up the photos Sarah and I had discussed. "I'm sending you documentation now. Tom, people are going to die if this doesn't get fixed." Silence stretched across the line. Then, "Send everything you have. I'll put the inspection on the schedule for next week. Make it official. Full compliance audit. Consider it done." I hung up and looked at my wife sleeping in that hospital bed. The enforcer in crimson had made this personal when she blocked that ambulance. Now, I was making it systematic. The dominoes were positioned. Time to start pushing. Brian Osworth appeared at my door at 7 p.m. on a Sunday, clutching a cardboard box against his chest like it contained something holy or damning. His hands trembled as he set it on my kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't watch her destroy more families." Inside the box were 5 years of HOA meeting minutes, not the sanitized versions posted on the community website, but Brian's personal copies. Handwritten notes in the margins, audio recordings on labeled flash drives, dates, times, discussions captured in meticulous detail. "She targets vulnerable homeowners on purpose," Brian said, sinking into a chair. His composure was fracturing. "Elderly residents, people with disabilities, anyone making medical modifications. I've watched her do it systematically since 2020. "Why?" I started pulling documents from the box, scanning dates and topics. "Property values." He laughed bitterly. "That's what she claims publicly. But look at the meeting minutes from March 2022, page 7. I found the date. Brian's notes documented a closed session discussion where the board chair had talked about strategic enforcement to encourage property turnover and mentioned 3 addresses as acquisition opportunities. "She owns investment properties," Brian continued, "uses her real estate connections to monitor which homes are in distress, then weaponizes HOA violations to force liens. Property values drop when liens are filed, makes them easier to acquire below market rate." My blood went cold. "She's deliberately devaluing homes to buy them cheap. 3 properties in 5 years, all targeted with excessive violations first, all purchased by LLCs she's connected to." Brian pulled out another folder, hands shaking harder now. "After my wife died, I started documenting everything. Carol had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. We needed medical oxygen deliveries 3 times a week." His voice broke completely. "The tyrant in heels fined us $200 every single delivery, called them commercial vehicle violations. Carol was dying, and that woman was billing us for the oxygen keeping her alive those last few months." Tears streamed down his face. "I voted with her, Marcus. I sat in those meetings and voted to target people just like us because I was too afraid to stand up." I gripped his shoulder. "You're standing up now." "I have recordings of her discussing property acquisitions while reviewing violation cases. I have her admitting she fast-tracks enforcement on homes with resale potential. I have everything." He looked up at me with devastated eyes. "I've been waiting for someone who could actually fight back, someone she couldn't intimidate or crush." Brian Osworth had just handed me a weapon that could end the enforcer in Crimson's reign. and I was going to use every bit of it. My home office became a command center, 3 monitors glowing, documents spread across every surface, Brian's recordings playing through headphones while I built something the tyrant in heels would never see coming. I wasn't just fighting an HOA violation anymore, I was building a multi-agency case. First target, County Emergency Services Authority. I compiled everything: Danny's information about the EMS complaints, Torres's incident reports about gate access, time-stamped Ring camera footage from my neighbor showing the blocked ambulance, medical records documenting Jennifer's delayed treatment. The complaint form asked for a description of interference with emergency services. I wrote 3 single-spaced pages. Second target, Fire Marshal Tom Hendricks. I'd already requested the inspection, but now I gave him ammunition. Photos of the entrance pillars with measurements showing 11-foot clearance instead of the required 14. Documentation of the gate system's 30-second override delay. 3 years of EMS incident reports citing access difficulties at Whispering Pines. Third target, State Real Estate Commission. This was the nuclear option. Brian's meeting minutes revealed the board chair discussing acquisition opportunities while simultaneously voting on violations for those same properties. I cross-referenced property records, 3 homes in 5 years, all purchased by Castellanos Investment Properties LLC, within months of HOA liens being filed. I documented the pattern, attached audio recordings of her discussing strategic enforcement, and filed a formal ethics complaint for conflict of interest and abuse of authority. But I wasn't done. I dug deeper into the gate system and found something beautiful. Safe Gate Systems, the company that installed our non-compliant entrance, was owned by Ricardo Castellanos, the enforcer in Crimson's brother. She'd steered an HOA contract to family while installing equipment that violated emergency access codes. That was another ethics violation, another piece of the puzzle. Then I made a call to Whispering Pines insurance carrier, posing as a concerned homeowner with hypothetical questions about liability coverage. If an HOA's entrance design obstructed emergency vehicles, I asked carefully, and someone was injured due to delayed response, would that be covered? The insurance rep's answer was music to my ears. That would constitute a known hazard. If the board was aware of access issues and failed to remedy them, we'd likely deny coverage and potentially cancel the policy. I didn't mention specific incidents, didn't need to. The insurance company would start asking those questions themselves once they got wind of Tom's inspection. Every piece positioned. County ESA investigating emergency interference. Fire Marshal conducting code compliance audit. State Commission reviewing ethics violations. Insurance carriers' attention subtly directed toward liability exposure. The clipboard queen had built her power on bureaucracy and intimidation. I was about to show her what happens when real authority gets involved. The post office at 9 a.m. on a Monday. I stood at the counter with 6 certified letters, each one a ticking bomb addressed to a different agency. The postal clerk scanned them one by one. County Emergency Services Authority, Fire Marshal's Office, State Real Estate Commission, HOA Insurance Carrier, County Code Enforcement, State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Each envelope drop into the outgoing mail bin felt like loading rounds into a chamber. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed the other victims ready to add their voices when the investigations began. Mrs. Chen answered her door with cautious hope when I explained what I'd discovered. She targeted you because your handrail made your home less marketable. It's part of a pattern. I'll testify to anything you need, Mrs. Chen said, her arthritic hands gripping mine. Anything. The Patels were next, then Dale Morrison in his wheelchair, fury burning in his eyes when I showed him the meeting minutes where the board chair had discussed addressing accessibility eyesores. She called my ramp an eyesore while I was sitting in the meeting, Dale said quietly. I'll sign whatever you need. 4 families, 4 stories of medical necessity being weaponized, 4 witnesses ready to speak. I also contacted Melissa Park, a local news reporter who'd covered HOA abuse stories before. I didn't give her everything, not yet, but I planted seeds. I can't comment on ongoing agency investigations, I said carefully. But hypothetically, if an HOA president was using violations to acquire properties below market value while her family profited from non-compliant installations, that would be newsworthy, right? Melissa's interest sharpened immediately. Hypothetically, I'd want to be first on that story. I'll remember that. The final piece was the most delicate. I drafted a carefully worded letter to the HOA's insurance carrier. Not a complaint, but an inquiry about coverage scenarios. I described hypothetical situations, emergency access obstructions, known code violations, delayed emergency response leading to injury. I asked about liability exposure and policy cancellation triggers. Never mentioned Deirdre by name, never cited specific incidents, just planted questions that would make any insurance investigator start digging. I mailed that letter last, watching it disappear into the slot. 2 weeks. That's how long Tom said the inspection would take to schedule. 2 weeks for the State Real Estate Commission to begin their review. 2 weeks for County ESA to investigate the emergency services complaints. The enforcer in Crimson had no idea what was coming. She was still focused on my $2,500 fine, still adding daily penalties, still believing her clipboard and bylaws made her untouchable. She'd built her kingdom on paper authority. I'd just mobilized real power against her. Now I waited for the dominoes to fall. 14 days later, Fire Marshal Tom Hendricks arrived at Whispering Pines in an official county vehicle, clipboard in hand and a code enforcement officer trailing behind him. I watched from my driveway as Deirdre intercepted them at the entrance, her power suit pristine, her smile forced. She tried to control the narrative, gave them a guided tour, pointed out community improvements, spoke in that sugary tone she used when performing for outsiders. But Tom wasn't interested in her spin. I watched him measure the entrance pillars, 11 feet, 2 inches. Code required 14 feet minimum for emergency apparatus. He tested the gate override system, 34 seconds from signal to full open. Code required instantaneous response. He walked every street, photographing address markers, or the lack of them. Half the subdivision had decorative plaques instead of reflective numbers. Non-compliant. The tyrant in heels followed him, her composure cracking with each notation Tom made in his inspection log. When he photographed 3 fire hydrants blocked by her approved decorative landscaping, her mask slipped completely. Those plantings were specifically approved by the Architectural Committee, she said, her voice tight. Then the Architectural Committee approved code violations, Tom replied, not looking up from his documentation. Fire hydrants require 3-foot clearance radius, 0 obstructions. This is basic safety code. I could see her calculating, trying to pivot, but Tom was methodical. 18 years in fire services had made him immune to bureaucratic charm. That same week, a letter arrived from the State Real Estate Commission, addressed to Deirdre Castellanos, marked Official Investigation Inquiry. I only knew because Brian told me he'd seen her tear it open in the HOA office, her face going white. 2 days after that, the insurance carrier sent their audit request. I intercepted the mail carrier, not to steal anything, just to see. The envelope was thick, official, demanding comprehensive documentation of board meetings, emergency access protocols, and liability insurance compliance. The clipboard queen called an emergency board meeting within hours. Brian received the notice, but sent his resignation letter instead. "I'm done being complicit," his letter read. "I can no longer serve on a board that targets vulnerable residents for financial gain." His resignation was public, posted to the community website. Neighbors started asking questions. The whispers began. Then came the notice every homeowner dreaded, mandatory community meeting in 3 days to address false allegations and restore community order. She was losing control of her narrative. The agencies were circling. The insurance carrier was auditing. Brian had publicly broken ranks. The enforcer in Crimson was finally feeling pressure from powers she couldn't intimidate or fine into submission. And I was about to walk into that community meeting with evidence that would end her completely. Whispering Pines Community Center, 7 p.m. 89 homeowners packed into a room designed for 60, tension thick enough to choke on. Deirdre stood at the podium in crimson, always crimson, trying to project authority, while cracks showed in her foundation. "We're here to address malicious complaints filed against this HOA by a disgruntled resident," she began, her voice sharp. "These baseless accusations." Brian Osworth stood from the back row, every head turned. "I've served on this board for 5 years, he said, his voice carrying despite the tremor. "I've been complicit in targeting vulnerable neighbors. I'm here to make it right." He walked to the front, carrying folders that now felt like weapons. He distributed copies. Summaries of meeting minutes, highlighted sections showing the board chair discussing property acquisitions while voting on violations for those same addresses. The room erupted in whispers. "Brian, you're out of order," the tyrant in heels tried to interrupt. "I have recordings," Brian said simply, "of you discussing strategic enforcement to encourage turnover, of you admitting you fast-track violations on homes with resale potential." Her face went pale. I stood, calm and deliberate. Fire Marshal Tom Hendricks completed his emergency access inspection last week. Preliminary findings: multiple code violations requiring immediate remediation. The entrance pillars, commissioned and approved by President Castellanos, reduce clearance below legal requirements. The gate system her brother's company installed lacks proper override capability. The county is issuing daily fines of $1,000 until compliance is achieved. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The State Real Estate Commission is investigating conflicts of interest related to 3 property acquisitions made by Castellanos Investment Properties, LLC, all homes that were subjected to excessive HOA violations before liens were filed. I pulled out the Ring camera footage on my tablet. This is the night she blocked an ambulance responding to my wife's medical emergency. 9 minutes. My wife seized for 9 minutes because of a parking permit. The footage played on the projection screen. Deirdre standing beside her Mercedes, arms crossed, refusing to move while ambulance lights strobed behind her. The room exploded, neighbors shouting, demanding answers. Mrs. Chen stood, showing her handrail violation. The Patels described their solar panel fines. Dale Morrison spoke about his wheelchair ramp being called an accessibility eyesore. "Motion to remove Deirdre Castellanos as HOA president," someone shouted. "Seconded," the vote was called. Hands shot up across the room like a wave. 102 in favor, 11 against. The enforcer in crimson stood frozen at the podium, her kingdom collapsing in real time. She grabbed her briefcase and stormed toward the exit, heels clicking against tile. "You'll hear from my lawyers," she spat, but her threats were hollow now. Everyone knew it. 3 months after that meeting, Whispering Pines looked different. The decorative entrance pillars were gone, replaced with code-compliant clearance. The gate system had been completely rebuilt with proper emergency override. Instantaneous response, exactly as required. Every street had reflective addressing. Fire hydrants stood clear. The county's daily fines had motivated fast action. $43,000 in penalties before the HOA finally completed all corrections, paid from reserves the former board chair had been hoarding for years. Deirdre Castellanos faced civil suits from 7 homeowners. Her real estate license was suspended pending ethics hearings. The state attorney general's office was reviewing her property acquisitions for fraud. She disappeared from the neighborhood entirely, her house dark, a for sale sign staked in the front lawn. But the real victory wasn't her downfall. It was what grew from the ashes. Brian and I restructured the HOA completely. Monthly meetings became community gatherings instead of enforcement tribunals. We created a medical accommodation process, 48-hour approval for any equipment tied to documented health needs. Mrs. Chen's handrail, the Patel's solar panels, Dale's wheelchair ramp, all violations dismissed, all fines refunded. And my Amber Beacon? County Emergency Services officially designated it Emergency Access Point Alpha for the entire subdivision. What the Clipboard Queen had called a violation was now required safety equipment, marked with official signage. The impact spread beyond our gates. County adopted new regulations requiring emergency access audits for all HOA communities. 8 nearby subdivisions voluntarily improved their systems after seeing our story on the news. Melissa Park had written a piece that went viral, exposing HOA abuse patterns statewide. State legislators introduced the Medical Necessity Accommodation Act, directly inspired by Jennifer's case. It mandated protections for homeowners with documented medical equipment needs. One amber light had sparked systemic change. Tonight, Jennifer and I stood in our driveway, watching that beacon glow against the darkening sky. Neighbors gathered for a block party, actual community, not enforced compliance. Kids played in the street. Families laughed together without fear of violation notices. "You changed everything," Jennifer said softly, her hand in mine. "We changed everything," I corrected. "You, me, Brian, Mrs. Chen, everyone who refused to stay silent." The fight had never been just about one fine or one light. It was about whether communities protect their most vulnerable members or prey on them, about whether power corrupts absolutely, or whether ordinary people can dismantle tyranny when they stand together. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because every community deserves to be a place of safety, not a kingdom ruled by clipboards and fear. The amber light still glows above my garage, a beacon for emergencies, a symbol of victory, a reminder that justice, when properly armed, always finds its mark.